Welcome to Praise Hands, home of the Praise Hands. I'm your host, Robbie Valderrama. After peacefully attending the January 6th rally in Washington, D.C., third-party voter Wendy Cunningham was cut out of a lifelong friendship, labeled a racist, and had her family's lone income source threatened by business colleagues. In order to avoid violent radicalism in this age of cancel culture and misinformation, I believe that one of the ways the church can proactively love our neighbors is by creating spaces where people can both share and hear diverse perspectives. If we have a hard time seeing how anyone in their right mind could get behind either the Black Lives Matter protests or the January 6th protests, I hope that just like Jesus, we've got the humility and maturity to remember that empathizing with the frustrations of our neighbors is not the same thing as endorsing their actions or associations. Amidst the abject failure of many of society's consensus-generating mechanisms, the stream of questions flows endlessly. Where and how do we find the truth? What recourse is there when that search shows popular narratives to be less than fully true? And particularly within the church, to what degree and for what reasons should we participate in cancel culture? Whether our next step is greater empathy, discernment, or repentance, it is the truth that sets us free. And I hope we can all take that next step through today's episode. Please join me in welcoming Wendy Cunningham to the Praise Hands podcast. Wendy, good morning.
Good morning.
So you are on a farm right now, is that correct?
Yes, we live on 84 acres. So I have goats and peacocks, which are loud, and chickens and cats and dogs and children.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
So if we hear something screaming, you can just blame it on one of the animals, right?
Yep. I will try to alert you to what it might be.
That sounds like a really fun game. So to kick us off, tell us a little bit about yourself. I know you've been one of the many migrants from the West Coast to kind of the Nashville area, as well as some of these other pockets in the United States. Tell us a little bit about yourself, the 10,000-foot overview for our listeners who may not be familiar with you.
Sure. Yeah. I'm a mom. I have a 9-year-old, a 7-year-old, and a 5-year-old, and we homeschool. And we homeschooled before it was 2020 cool. So we've been doing that a little while, and I've been married for 13 years to my husband. We met and started our relationship when we lived in California in the Sacramento area.
Okay.
And he was a firefighter that moved us to the Nevada area, kind of South Lake Tahoe. And we lived there a number of years before we made our way out here about 4 years ago to the farm. We just wanted kind of a different life, a different pace, a different experience for our kids. So that's kind of what brought us here. I'm a entrepreneur. I have a health and wellness business online. That's going on 12 years now. So wow. It's been wonderful to be flexible with that. Obviously, we don't have to be tied to any location. And my husband's kind of he was a firefighter until he joined me in our business. And now recently he's in real estate. As you know, that's a hot thing in the Nashville area these days. And he's actually an entrepreneur as well, starting a startup in the farm industry, kind of farm tech industry, if you will. So that's actually launching this week or next week. So we hope to bring that, the homesteading lifestyle to people who don't want to homestead, but would love the fruits of that labor. So that's kind of the goal of his business.
Wow, that's cool. Well, let's just dive right in here. One of the reasons that I wanted to interview you today is that you were at the U.S. Capitol, Washington, D.C. on January 6th of 2021. Obviously, that is a day that a lot of people will remember for a long time. Tell me, for starters, why did you go on January 6th?
Sure. Thank you for asking that question. I feel like very few people have asked that question, and it's an important one. I am not someone who's, or I should say, I was not someone who was very political or even knowledgeable in the political space until this election. My husband and I are both libertarians by the ballot. And so, we've kind of been very flexible in our party allegiance, if you will. And this particular election, I just felt there was a lot of just issues that just did not sit right in my soul. And I became, almost obsessive with paying attention to how that was all unfolding. After November 3rd, I watched the Senate hearings almost entirely live. I mean, being a work from home, homeschool mom, I have the flexibility to become obsessed with that stuff and, kind of let the rest of life settle in. And so I learned a lot. I mean, I'm grateful for that because I now have a much greater understanding of what our Congress is, how it works, all of these elements of the Constitution. So that's all been a blessing. But as I was learning more, I was just really becoming more and more unsettled about the whole thing. And, as the different thresholds of time kind of were going by, it was coming down to this really important vote on the 6th. And it was a last minute decision. Both my husband and I felt convicted separately that we needed to be there. One, I felt like it is easy to do things in secret. It is easy to do things under a shadow. And I felt if people were standing outside that building, the people who are meant to be representing us inside that building would feel the accountability of making sure that our voices were being heard. And so that was kind of an initial thought, but then also being a Christian, I absolutely believe in the power of prayer, and I believe in the power of collective prayer. And I know personally, I knew of a number of people I respect as Christians that were also feeling convicted to go. So I knew there would be that power. And I felt like in such a time where we feel so, or at least I felt really helpless as a single voice, how can I have any effect or influence on this craziness that I felt like was unfolding? I do feel like the power of prayer is, a weapon, if you will, that I had to wield. And so I knew if I don't go and stand there and reach out my hands and pray and do what I know I can do, I will regret that. And so kind of for those two reasons, we really decided, you know what, let's go do that.
So a question that has been surfaced is really, what role do you feel Christianity played on January 6th? Like when you went there, did you feel like that was a Christian themed event? And if so, how did that make you feel when people went into the Capitol building? If not, then I'd love to hear your perspective on that as well.
Sure. I had no idea what to expect because I've never been to a protest in my life, so I just was as green as you could be. One of my very close friends went with me, and she, came from California, and she got there the day before I did. So Monday evening. So she was present Tuesday, the day before the 6th. And she sent me a message just absolutely in tears. The very first thing she attended on Tuesday, they started with worship music and started with a prayer. And it makes me emotional even now. Like, that's not what she expected. That's not what I expected. So I was thrilled. I was already, en route there when she told me that, oh my goodness, that's so great. That's just great to hear. And I absolutely experienced that. We got to the Ellipsis, which is outside the White House, at around 7 a.m. on the 6th. And that event, that part of the day, was organized. Honestly, I can't remember the ministry now, but it was organized by a Christian ministry. And so again, that was unexpected, but I was very excited. There was a lot of evangelical crowd happening with bullhorns throughout the day. Lots of just impromptu worship, just a cappella coming from the crowd. There was maybe 10 of us in our group. We prayed multiple times throughout the day, had amazing experience around that. A lot of the crowd that I spoke to, was very open about their Christianity. Lots of Jesus 2020 signs, absolutely a culture of that during the day. And, I don't mean to jump ahead of you, but we were there the whole day, and we did walk over to the Capitol in the later part of the day, and we're there until 3:30 or 4 p.m., absolutely unaware of what was happening inside the Capitol. But up until that point, it was a profound experience. I was very moved and felt unity probably for the first time in 2020, felt community and connection, or 2021 rather, right? I missed a whole year of community as a matter of fact. But yeah, does that answer your question? It was absolutely there.
Yeah. Because one of the talking points that is out there is that everyone that was at that rally on the 6th is a Christian nationalist. In other words, somebody that believes that because I'm a Christian, the values that I have should be reflected in the government, and that is the best way to rule the country. And so even if people are of different faiths, they should still adhere to the Christian way of government. And so there's obviously a tension there, right? Because we do believe in the values that Christianity holds, and we do believe they're helpful and useful. At the other hand, we're not trying to shove things down people's throat. So how would you address that from your perspective if somebody would come at you, and this probably happened to you, and says, hey, you're a Christian nationalist trying to, shove this Christianity thing and force your way into my life through politics. How do you speak to that?
Oh, man, that is actually not one of the things I've been accused of being since
one of the few things
since January 6th. I feel like.
And that may not be something you're hearing. That's definitely something that I'm hearing a lot, is the conversation about Christian nationalism in conjunction with that event. So maybe I can ask this question a different way. From your perspective there, do you feel like the crowd there was trying to say, this is our country as a Christian nation. We are wanting this to be a Christian nation, and everybody else, you kind of have to, play second fiddle to what we want this country to be. Is that an easier question to answer?
Yes. And okay. I would say absolutely not. I personally did not have a conversation with anyone that was outside the context of the election. My husband and I said, this would have been a complete non-thing if we all felt that Biden had won fair and square. It's not about our candidate or no one's candidate. And I'm not even a huge Trump person. I did not have any Trump gear on. I was not there as that. That's not one of the reasons I came. But yeah, I would say that our current president does not align with my personal values, but I understand. And I think I don't want to speak for the crowd, but I did not get the sense that that was the problem that people had. It was more that there is no answers. And this was so egregious in the eyes of people who were watching closely. And my first question is, have you read an affidavit? Have you watched a Senate hearing? Have you really watched? Because we can all read our news sources, and every news source is biased. Doesn't matter where you're coming from, right? So the way for me to really understand what I thought was happening without someone telling me what I should think about what was happening was to just listen to the information from, the analysis or the person who was there or whatever. And so the answer was, every single time I asked that question, was no, I don't have time. I'm busy. And I get that. The Arizona Senate hearing was 10 hours long and I watched all 10 hours. It's who has time? I totally get it. I'm a crazy person. But yes, to answer your question, it was not at all about we feel that we have to take over the country as Christians. No, that was not the spirit at all.
Yeah, no, thank you for sharing that. Let's go to the part of the day. Obviously, rioters go inside of the Capitol building. You're probably getting maybe some text messages from friends and family and saying, hey, what's going on? What has the journey been like from that point forward for you? We talk about church, race, music, and economics on this show. You were called a racist for being at the Capitol on that day. Walk me through that process for you.
Yeah. As I said before, being present at the Capitol, it wasn't until, very close to the end. And we had very limited cell service given the amount of people. I wasn't getting a lot of message from outside, and I had limited access to social media throughout the day. So I only knew what I was experiencing, which was nothing, that was being shown on the news. And so I was completely unaware of it. At the very end of the day, it started to kind of circulate through the crowd that somebody was shot, and I really, honestly, I dismissed it because I'm like, what? If someone was shot, wouldn't they be dissipating the crowd? And, wouldn't we see more of a police presence trying to control? And it didn't feel out of control at all. So I didn't feel like there should have been more police getting control. And then we did hear also at the end that people had gotten inside. And I was like, there's no way. There's no way. DC is, we had just been in DC in September as a family. And so I'm like, this is one of the most guarded buildings on a regular day of the week. Why on earth would we ever suspect that this would be breached on the most important, crazy election? I just thought that's very unlikely and dismissed it and went about, we walked back to the hotel. And that's when, oh my goodness, it was the strangest, almost out of body thing to sit down on my hotel bed and get a glimpse at the news, and I didn't even have the audio on at first. I just turned it on. And because of course, at that point, people had called me as we were getting better service. A number of friends, are you okay? Are you okay? Yeah, we're fine. And again, no one specifically said what they were watching on the news. So I was just like, yeah, we're fine. There's nothing to see here. We're going back to the hotel. And then once I saw what they were seeing, I just was sick. I was so sick to my stomach because I guess a part of me, the risks I thought I was taking as a mom by going to DC on the 6th, we've seen it play out this all summer long. I anticipated violence. I anticipated, maybe witnessing things that would be scary. And of course, I thought, yeah, there's a chance that there could be something even more serious and I could be hurt. Those were kind of the risks I thought I was taking and saw none of that in the streets or, on anything in front of my eyes. I didn't see any of that. And so
now to interject there, you weren't planning on instigating violence from you to other people.
Oh, thank you for clarifying that. No. I was afraid that there would just be some because that's kind of, having never gone to a protest before and watching that there would be protests during the day, during the summer, and then it would devolve into violence after dark.
Like in Nashville.
Yes, exactly. So I feared that I would see it, not at all that I would experience it. I'm the biggest baby ever. So I'm like, I would run and cry, but I didn't. And that surprised me. And so when I got back to the hotel, I'm like, oh my goodness gracious. And then of course, start to come the inbox messages that I am that just by association of having been there. I thought it's one thing if you don't know who I am at all, for you to draw that assumption. And yeah, that's your prerogative. But for the people who do know me, who were accusing me of these things or saying these things, that was, whoa, that's not true. That I don't feel that way. And it was crazy how you're just shoved in a box immediately and up to and including within 24 hours, I was reported, a number of us, I should say, were reported to my CEO, telling my CEO that I am a domestic terrorist and should have my income taken. Well, I am the income for my family. So that was a direct threat on our livelihood, and gosh, I know that it's like, I didn't do anything, but truly I'm like, I didn't even know anything had happened, so it was really crazy stretch, especially having, walked through the summer of, being told again and again to separate. There are protesters, there are rioters. One does not connect to the other. And, one is fine and one is not fine. And all of these things, that was just absolutely all out the window. And seems to remain to be largely out the window.
So when it comes to those relationships, like, as much as you feel comfortable sharing, have there been some people that were willing to hear your side of the story and hear you actually share your heart, as well as how did that resolve with your company?
Luckily, to answer the latter, luckily our CEO just decided to say nothing. He just decided to say nothing. There's no need to get out in front, of course. And I would support if I knew of someone from my company that had stormed the Capitol, that had done something they weren't supposed to do. Of course, those people need to be held accountable, but that wasn't any of us, and so we were absolutely well within our constitutional rights to do what we did. And so that all was fine. It was fine in terms of that problem being solved. However, of course, as the cancel culture continues to grow, that didn't mean that I was unscathed. There are a number of clients or business partners or what have you that have decided now, I was the same person on January 5th as I was on January 7th, but for whatever revelation, they now have downloaded some assumptions about me, no longer want to do business with me. Again, that's their prerogative, and I trust God. This was actually a huge exercise in trusting God for my provision and recognizing that perhaps I had some idol going on there with my income and thinking that was, I have to protect that. And so that was actually a blessing in hindsight, really. But ask me that first part of the question again, because I want to.
Yeah, from your conversations with some of the people that were maybe calling you certain things or assuming certain things about you, how many of them were receptive to having a conversation to hear really some of the context for you, and how many of them were not receptive to that? One
person reached out to me that day. We're great friends. I respect her. She is in my business. And she messaged me on the 6th, before I had gotten back to my hotel. And basically, I think I could sense that she was angry and confused, as she would be. And that in turn made me angry because I did not know what she was seeing. Right.
Yeah.
So I felt like, whoa, whatever. And so I didn't respond immediately. And then later in the day, I had to go back to her and apologize and thank her, because that was very brave, come to find out, and radically uncommon for someone to say, I am hurt and angered at you, but I want to understand because I know who you are, and I don't think you mean to be hurtful to me, so explain it to me. And we ended up having an hour and a half conversation that day, which has gone to today, and I'm very grateful for that. And do we see eye to eye on it? No. And that's okay. But we still have a friendship and respect each other. And that is super important. That is the only one personally who made that attempt to understand. Actually, I should say I did write a blog about it, right? So that has now opened up a number of conversations. Kind of now that they see what my perspective was, they're like, oh, okay, maybe I jumped to blah, blah, blah. But to me, I'm like, the one friend did it before she understood where I was coming from. But I had a good friend who has known me, gosh, my entire life. Our families are very close. Like, I'm close with her parents, the whole picture. And she just accused me of being things I'm not. And I can no longer support you in any way. You're canceled. And I knew where she sat on the issue. So I can't say that it surprised me that happened that evening. And again, we are a culture of reaction and not response. And so I was like, okay, that's your right to do that. And I love you and you know who I am. And I hope you remember that on the flip side. And we have not had another conversation. So I don't know if her heart has softened at all about that. But that was, kind of an extreme, a very shocking, extreme example. And that was one of a small handful. I won't say that I was inundated with, hate speech or anything like that. I do have the sense that there is a distance between me and a lot of people. There wasn't a conversation. There's just a distance. And that could be me just being afraid and sensitive at this point because of the lash that kind of came at me. But overwhelmingly, and I have to say this, there was just really beautiful messages of encouragement, really beautiful messages from people I know and absolute strangers that said, I appreciate you going and doing that because I feel these things and couldn't go or didn't go or chickened out or what have you. So thank you for standing for people who feel the same as you, who couldn't be there. So that was encouraging and affirming.
Yeah. So let's say 4 years go by, who knows what the world is going to be like in 4 years, or a similar situation presents itself. How can people who have maybe a concern that you had go about voicing that concern and really guard against what you have stated as really being completely misrepresented in terms of your intentions and your goals in being there? What can be done in the future so that way people, and like you said, it could be on the opposite side of the political spectrum the next time, but in terms of the representation and in terms of the actual voice not being co-opted for other uses, how do we navigate through this as a culture in the future? And I don't know that there's an easy answer, but I'd love to hear your perspective.
We need to not wait 4 years. We need to be proactive, like I said, about, having conversations with your representatives, understanding what can we do legally so that we all at least feel confident, regardless of the outcome of, what happened, with the election. So I feel like that's just something we all need to be conscious of doing immediately, and not before 4 years, but before 2 years, because we have midterms in 2022. And those are really important, just because we are not that far away from the Senate or the House, just being, we're very close. And so these are important elections. We need to kind of make sure that we get these things cleaned up so that we can move forward feeling confident, whatever the outcome would be. But we have got to humanize this thing that's happening, this cancel culture that's happening. I have personally decided to eliminate social media from my life, which is tricky because I have an online business. So that is kind of one of those leap and the net will appear kind of games, because I don't know what that's going to look like entirely to eliminate those things. But I can no longer participate in a system that villainizes me and the other person against each other and sorts us so that we can't even talk. And I also feel that the culture of social media has made us bold in the wrong way, because we will say things on social media that we would never say to another person. And, there are people I know that go to our church that said vicious things. And I'm like, I don't know if I sit in the pew next to you. I don't know if you know who you're saying those things to. And outside of social media, you would know. You would be talking to a human, and you wouldn't be as vicious, hopefully, as you're allowed to be on social media. So I think we need to pull a lot of these conversations offline, have them in real ways, and remember how this felt to be on this side, because it could feel that way to be on the other side. And the identity politics game, man, especially, like, I can't speak to people who aren't anchored in Christianity, but Christians, our identity is to be in Christ, not in our political affiliation, so we need to hold more loosely some of these things and trust God more, because that's all I'm left with, right? That's all been stripped. I have been stripped of any kind of sense that I have any control over anything, which again is a blessing. I feel like we are really identifying and taking personally. And that's how it feels in the conversation, that we can't talk without you feeling like I'm calling you a cheater because of that identity in the party, right? And so we got to shake that off. We got to get rid of that and humanize it. That's what we need to do.
Right. There's a lack of an ability to separate one's function and one's place in a system, even involuntarily, with one's intention. So, for example, I've had this conversation about life in the South with an individual who's from California. And this individual was saying, man, I can't believe white people in the South are so racist. And I'm like, okay, I take maybe a different approach than a lot of people, where I would say there are ways that the system is set up to disproportionately disadvantage people of color.
Sure.
Does that mean that was every white person's intention to do that? Mm-hmm. No. And so there's this word of ontology of who somebody is. I'm not going to call you a racist because you sit in a certain spot in a system. Mm-hmm. Now, I might say by you not doing anything against this advantage, yeah, like other people are going to have it rougher than you. And that's probably not fair. Mm-hmm. But am I going to say, hey, you are a racist? No, that doesn't help anybody. And so I think it applies in different directions. Like you said, that nuance is gone. And we have been unable to disassociate. And I think it's a lack of maturity, disassociate how something affects us versus someone else's actions. It's like a little baby. If you take a poison away from them, they're going to be mad because they say, hey, that poison got taken away from me, therefore you are bad.
Yeah.
Now, in the parent's role, you're saying, no, I'm not bad. I'm just taking this away from you because I don't want you to die. Your perception is one thing. And we have to be very careful to distinguish between our perception of a situation and the actions and the intentions of the other parties. Now, in some cases, it still sucks just as much for that baby. He's still just as upset.
Right.
But he has to, as he gets older and matures, realize there might be things that I'm not seeing here, and have the humility to ask questions like your friend did to you and say, hey, I'm really pissed right now that you took away my poison. But can we have a conversation about this so I can understand where you're coming from? And I think especially within the church, we need to be the people that are proactively and not reactively initiating those conversations before the narrative has already been set by someone else and we're already pitted against each other. And at Praise Hands, we're all about creative cross-cultural Christianity. And what that means in the cross-cultural part is bridging across those gaps, is meeting people that don't look like us, that may not believe the same way as us, and saying, hey, let's find some common ground. Let's start there.
Sure.
And let's be willing to associate with people that the media might tell us that is threatening for us to associate with those people. But that's really where creativity comes from, is where diverse people get together and collaborate. And I do share some of the concern that you voiced, in that if we are totally separated from each other, that's really not a place that's sustainable for society to continue existing in.
Right. The echo chamber has been so solidified. And that's not where we are challenged or where we grow. Just to have our own opinion fed back to us really just increases our anger, our entitlement, our, weaponizing against the other side. But then again, like you said, it just sets us up for the wrong interaction when there is that crossover, of ideas. And in another category of my life, I grew up as an atheist. So having to deconstruct, if you will, everything I thought I knew for sure, and be challenged and have to rethink and wonder and question and ask more questions and ask more questions. It doesn't happen in a single conversation. You don't walk away going, oh, I guess now I see it differently. It oftentimes brings up more defensiveness, more insecurity. It just disrupts everything to have these conversations. So it's a process. It is a process. And for me, it happened over 3 or 4 or 5 years of conversations, of asking questions, of explain this part. Again, I'm grateful to have gone through that so that I can try to look through that lens in other categories of life. But I also recognize how much ego and pride is connected with what we think we know for sure. And having to be the one that's like, well, maybe I didn't get that part right, or maybe I don't fully get that. Or worse, I can't even explain to you why I think what I think. That was kind of the worst for me, was I should at least be able to articulate why I think this, So yeah, I think we're just a culture of quick fixes, and we expect that this will resolve, and we just need to move on. We're done talking about it. We just need to move on, sweep it under the rug. And that's perpetuated by the media. We're not going to talk about that anymore. We're done. We're on to the next thing. And gosh, it is a process, and we need to have space for that. And we need to cultivate that and encourage that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Wendy, thank you so much for sharing. Who would have thought that you'd be sharing this story a month ago or a month or two ago?
Oh, not me.
Yeah. But thank you for being so vulnerable to share kind of how your experience has been through this and how it's affected you and your family. How can people learn more about you and follow the work that you're doing?
Sure. You can hop over to gainingmyperspective.com. That's kind of my only place where I live these days, since I've kind of scraped myself off of all the media platforms. But that's my blog. And I actually have a book coming out soon about that journey from atheism to Christianity. So you'll find that there too.
Wow. Well, thank you, Wendy. Really appreciate you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for tuning in, friends. The reality is that we all see in part and are accountable for both how we handle truth and how we handle those whose experience might not line up with our own. I hope you were challenged by Wendy's story, including her commitment to put in the time to seek truth for herself. If you've got thoughts or questions, we'd love for you to join the discussion about this episode in the Praise Hands Facebook group. You can join that group at praisehands.com/get involved. If you want to get in touch with Wendy, I'd encourage you to visit gainingmyperspective.com, read her blogs and research on the subject at hand, and send her a note. As you may know, there aren't a whole lot of spaces where these type of creative cross-cultural conversations can happen. If you appreciate what we're doing here at Praise Hands, there are a few ways you can express your gratitude. First, subscribe. Second, share this episode with a friend. And lastly, it would mean a lot to us if you left us a 5-star review on your favorite podcast app, or maybe a comment on YouTube. Thank you for being on this journey of creative cross-cultural Christianity with us. I'm your host, Robbie Valderrama, and we'll see you right back here in 2 weeks.